I don't need to persuade you that evil exists. We see it in the news headlines. We encounter it in our day-to-day lives. As I'm recording this video, it's the week after Charlie Kirk was assassinated. A true act of evil. We see all around us that things are not the way that they're supposed to be. Which, as I shared in my last video, suggests that there is a way that things ought to be. There is a design, there is a purpose for humanity that we're not living out, that we're coming up short of. I took us to Genesis 1, verses 26 through 28, in which the Bible tells us that God made human beings to be his image bearers, to reflect who he is in his creation. That is, that his righteousness, his goodness, his mercy, his justice would be manifest through us as we cultivate the earth. And yet, we recognize once again that we're not living that out. Which raises the question of, why is that? Why is it that we're failing to be the people that God created us to be? What accounts for the evil that we see out there, and also the evil that we find within ourselves? As we look in the mirror, we say to ourselves, I'm not who I want to be. Well, continuing on in the Genesis narrative, we find an explanation given. In Genesis 3, in the temptation of Adam and Eve, which led to the fall of humanity. Now, as soon as I mention Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden and the serpent, some of you it might give some of you pause. You might feel like, I'm not sure if I believe all of that. Well, for the moment, I want to invite you to kind of set that to the side, to just simply consider the narrative that is given, so that you might judge whether the picture that's provided matches our experience of human life, both of ourselves and of other people. And also, I invite you to check out some videos that I'm going to link down in the video description that kind of give a range of views, from young earth creationists to theistic evolutionists. There's a wide swath of opinions among Christians as far as how human life developed. But I believe what the Bible indicates we must affirm is that Adam and Eve were a historical couple. And that what we're talking about here is a historical fall of humanity. It can't be pure myth. As I quoted C.S. Lewis in the last video, what we're talking about here would be true myth. This is something that actually happened. It actually explains the human situation. These things that actually happened. Because if that was not the case, then we would be left wondering, well, if it's not our fault for the way things are in this world, then why did God create the world broken? As we'll see, God did not create the world broken, but he did give us a choice. In Genesis 3, verses 4 through 6, we find the serpent approaching the woman, Eve, and tempting her to take of this tree of the knowledge of good and evil, to eat the fruit of it. Now, in the Garden of Eden, there was many trees. There was a tree of life, and there was other trees that Adam and Eve might have eaten from. But God forbade them from eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And what this did is it set up a choice for Adam and Eve. Would they obey God? Would they trust God? Or would they decide to go their own way? Now, we can't understand God's perfect wisdom and all the whys as to why he presented humanity with this decision, but it does make sense in this sense that God truly desires to be in a relationship with us. And so he gave us a choice. And he even allowed that this serpent, which is just a creaturely form of Satan, we learn that in Revelation 12, he even allowed for this antagonistic spiritual being to enter into this garden so that humanity might decide, would Would they trust God, or would they instead seek their own fortune? And sadly, what we find is that they do seek their own fortune. So the serpent says to Eve, Genesis 3:4, "You will not certainly die. For God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be open and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. You see, God had told Adam and Eve that if they ate of the tree, that they would die. And here, what the serpent does is deny that flatly. He tells Eve, "You're not going to die." He says, God's just told you that because he doesn't want you to become like him. Because he knows that if you eat of this tree, you'll become like him, knowing good and evil. Eve and Adam, rather than trusting God's goodness, decide to believe the serpent. They decide to believe that, in fact, God was trying to keep them down. And that rather than reflecting who God is, as he had designed them to, as God's image bearers, they would like to become gods themselves and become wise in accordance with their own understanding, knowing good and evil for themselves, kind of making their own judgments about what's best. And so that's what they do. They take and eat of the tree, and the result was that they became subject to death. Adam and Eve were cast out of the garden. They were separated from the tree of life, which is a it's an extension of their communion with God. If they are separated from God, then they can have no life. It's like if you separate a flower from the presence of the sun, eventually it'll shrivel up and die. Because human beings are not naturally immortal. We're just mortal creatures. But if we are in relationship with God, we can continue to live. God can sustain us as long as he pleases. But apart from him, separated from the tree of life, they become subject to death. And they also become subject to the twistedness that they invited into themselves by taking and eating of this tree. They wanted to be wise in their own eyes, and so they get to live life on their own terms rather than God's terms. And so it's not surprising then that what we really find within ourselves and what we see in others is at root a desire to be our own gods, to live life on our own terms. It explains why it is that human beings are so often very selfish and very prideful, rather than submitting to God's wisdom and ways for themselves and in relation to others. Now, that doesn't mean that we're totally bereft of any sort of sense of what is good and right. That remains, but because of our sinfulness, we now wrestle with that. We are never who we are supposed to be completely. And the Apostle Paul talks about this in Romans 7, verses 19 through 24. And there's been some question among scholars as to whether he was talking about someone who was not a Christian or whether someone that had just come to Christ. But wherever the case may be, I think it can be said that this is an apt description of our experience wrestling with sin. Paul says, "For I do not do the good that I want to do, but I practice the evil that I do not want to do. Now if I do what I do not want, I am no longer the one that does it, but it is the sin that lives in me. So I discovered this law: when I want to do what is good, evil is present with me. For in my inner self I delight in God's law, but I see a different law in the parts of my body, waging war against the law of my mind and taking me prisoner to the law of sin in the parts of my body. What a wretched man I am! Who will rescue me from this body of death?" So what Paul is saying here in Romans 7 is that even though he knows what is good, And in the case, maybe this is someone that's a young Christian, even desires to do the good, the sinfulness that resides within us prevents us from being in complete harmony with God's desire and will for us. We continue to be disobedient. And it leads Paul to utter this kind of word of despair and wonder, saying, "Who will rescue me from this body of death?" And that's a question that we must ask for ourselves. Who can rescue us? Who can make us right? Who can make you who you're really supposed to be? Who can make this world what it's really supposed to be? Now, across the ages, there's been various proposals put forward. In the next video, we're going to consider the efficacy of those proposals. Have any been successful in really making this world anew and making us who we are supposed to be? Thanks for watching this video. I encourage you to like it, share it with your friends, subscribe to the channel. The name of this series is Our Messed Up World That Jesus Can Fix. We're going to be talking about this series in the small groups that we have at Rockland Community Church. RCC is the ministry out of which this Truth Rooted channel is presented. And so if you live in the area of North Scituate, Rhode Island, I encourage you to join us next month, October 2025, as we have some conversations about this series. But whether you're near or far, I encourage you to keep tracking with us and keep digging into the truth so you can know the God who created you. God bless. Catch you in the next video.